Hello and welcome to Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. Today I've got a really special guest, Simon Monk, co-founder of World Nomads, Australia's very first insurtech. In this new feature show, I'll be interviewing a fintech pioneer from a time before the word even existed. We'll talk about their journey and how they launched and scaled a successful business when there were no iPhones, no Stripe, no Facebook, no Twitter, and no AWS. Travel has always been a big part of Simon's life. He's been dreaming about what's over the horizon for as long as he can remember. Originally from the UK, he trained in design before getting involved in the very early days of the internet. As an avid traveller, he ended up in Australia where he founded World Nomads, an online travel insurance service for people just like him who love travelling and exploring. Before we chat to Simon, I just want to say a big thank you to you for your support. Tier 1 People has never been busier, and I'm really blown away by the calibre of clients and talent who continue to approach us after listening to the show. If you'd like to show your support, you can subscribe, leave us a review, or just tell your friends. And if you're a world-class fintech looking for Tier 1 People, reach out to me on LinkedIn or email info@tier1people.com. Simon, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I'm super excited to have this one. It's as somebody who kind of recruited in the insurance space for kind of 20 years. The word World Nomads always came up whenever you were talking to an insurance exec, and you ruffled so many feathers at the time that it's just fantastic to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, there was something that came up on Twitter the other day about being a dick. Like, is Elon Musk a dick? And it's just like, yeah, well, there's degrees of dickness, and lots of people, I'm sure, would say that about me. So.
Well, great. Look, I'm sure by the end of this show, not many of our listeners will think that you won. But I thought it would be awesome just to really share the story of, World Nomads from its origins and, before World Nomads and kind of how you built essentially a fintech, Australia's first insurtech, before it was even a word. And not before we had AWS and iPhones and Facebook and Twitter and all of this stuff now. It's a kind of arsenal for any startup business.
Yeah, back then it was an entirely different world. So I'll go back some decades. Most great businesses have got a genuine origin story.
Yeah.
And my origin story was I was traveling down from the UK overland across Asia in 1989, and I picked up, I think, Newsweek in Bangkok, and saw what was going on in China and thought, well, that looks interesting. Let's go to China. So changed all my plans and sort of just went off to China. This was before the age of the internet. And, I was traveling around China for 2 or 3 months, literally during all the demonstrations and the riots. And I was in Tiananmen Square.
Wow.
A few days after all the tanks were there, amongst other things. But when I was in Bangkok and my plans changed, I wanted to change my insurance. And they basically said, well, if you just come back to the UK, we'll sort you out. That wasn't going to happen. So my policy expired and I just traveled uninsured. And so be it. And I landed in Australia as a backpacker and did a whole bunch of backpackery type things. And then I emigrated in 1993, and it was pretty good timing. One point of luck of many, the internet was just starting out. This is like pre-browser. This is pre-Netscape pretty much. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. So I sort of threw myself into the early days of the internet, where not only were there no tools like AWS, but it wasn't barely a browser. I mean, this was, some of my colleagues can remember those days, and it was, there was no URLs, and you just had to know where to go, and the internet was microscopic. And there was certainly no e-commerce. But I spent the best part of a decade, I suppose, bit less, but learning to build internet-y things for other people, learning all the mistakes, trying to invent ways of doing things, because there were no rules of how to build internet sites long before Agile. And then somebody approached me and said, do you think insurance, like travel insurance, will work on the internet? And I said, yep, I know exactly how that should work on the internet. And just because of my own experiences, I believe there should be a product where you could buy it from anywhere in the world and extend it as much as you needed it, because plans change. Not everybody goes overseas for 10 days and comes home again. It's just not that straightforward. So found a developer. One of my colleagues actually was the developer, and we spent a year building it, nights and weekends, keeping our day jobs, which was the way you did things. First site was built in PHP, and then the second site was built in .NET. The first server we had was like $45,000, and it was a box that you had to go and plug into an ISP.
So you had to buy the server and find some money to go and buy that.
So you had to go and physically buy the server, and you had to physically put the server in an ISP at the time, and all the databases on it and everything else. Yeah, all off the back of credit cards, basically. But for anybody trying to invent a business today, I mean, $40,000 for a server when you've got AWS costing you like $4, is like, it gives you an idea of the scale.
I think Visa and MasterCard were the biggest VC or angel investors at that time.
Probably were. Somebody should have taken a cut of all those businesses, But even setting up payment gateways, just the early payment gateways were just torture to actually put together. You needed SSLs, and you needed, I've forgotten the process, but it took like several weeks to get like a payment gateway together.
So not a Stripe API.
Yeah, 4 lines of Stripe. It's been fun watching all this stuff appear. It's just been an incredible journey. Twitter didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist, AWS didn't exist. Anyway, roll forward a couple of years, and early days we had 1 customer a month, 4 customers the next month, 11 customers the month after that, and then going, So it was pretty obvious e-commerce was eventually going to grow up.
I remember chatting to Ben Webster, and he was talking about the early days of World Nomads, and he told me that you used to have a sweepstake around whether you would hit a certain amount of customers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. This is when we were doing maybe 10 or 20 customers a day, and then we had a sweepstake of when we thought we'd hit 100, and it was great fun because everybody used to come into the office, and the first thing that they used to say, this is when we were like maybe 8 people, like, how many sales were there yesterday? And going, 60, and it's just like, wow, Sure, I think that sweepstake lasted about 9 months. Took the best part of 9 months before it sort of went off, and somebody got a case of wine, which was good fun.
So what was the kind of catalyst then for you to start to go from hitting 20 a day to I think you were doing 20 every 30 seconds or every 10 seconds?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, lots of businesses luck, and our particular bit of luck amongst timing is hugely undervalued. Timing is often something that you don't have a great deal of control over. And in our case, we launched World Nomads, and we were like 4 months old. Google existed because Google had been around for maybe 3 years, I suppose. But AdWords didn't exist, and they launched about 4 months after we did. As a marketing channel, it was absolutely fantastic. I mean, you could basically, because I was a design user experience expert, I suppose you could say, and you could say, it takes 6 clicks to make a sale, 6 AdWords clicks to make a sale. And when the cost of AdWords back then was like 20 cents, that was $1.20 to make a sale. And it was just like poor money. Yeah.
I guess the competition for eyes on as well at that time, you would have had, everybody who was just gaming the system and just had, keywords and ad arbitrage. And so the user experience, for anybody on the internet at that time was pretty woeful. So if you had a kind of user experience that stood out from the crowd, I would imagine that would have kind of had an even bigger effect.
It was hugely important that there weren't actually that many people on AdWords in the early days. I mean, there weren't many customers, and there weren't many businesses. That sort of arrived a few years later. And you're right, user experience, and measuring the data and understanding what your conversion rate was absolutely key.
When was the point that kind of you started to get noticed by people outside of the business?
I don't actually know. I'm not sure how would I remember that one. A Lonely Planet actually noticed this because we had a very cheeky when we were trying to be noticed, when we were sort of nothing. Our first tagline was "It's no longer a lonely planet," which was quite funny. And we put that on a whole bunch of T-shirts and merchandise, and we got letters from their lawyers within a couple of weeks. And that got us noticed. But, it actually turned into a referral deal with Lonely Planet, which was really important because everybody was still buying guidebooks.
Yeah.
And just having links from their website to ours didn't completely change the game, but it allowed us some long-term planning.
Yeah. And so what was the kind of point where you really started to grow the business, not just in terms of, policies being sold, but people as well? As you mentioned there, at the time you were 8 people starting to grow. What was the point that it really started to kick off?
Yeah, the early days were fascinating. Going when there's like 2 or 3 of you and then 8 of you or 12 of you or 20 of you, the culture's great fun. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody does everything. You can hear all the customer service phone calls because there's just somebody in the corner taking all those phone calls. And when something happens, like a tsunami, like it did in 2004, everybody mans the phones. Programmers and designers and me. So everybody knows everything, and it was fantastic time, those early days. And then, of course, businesses scale, and you end up with 50 or 60 people, and you go through a different transition. It's a different sort of business at 60, and then doubles again, and it's a different sort of business again, and it just keeps going. And I have a huge admiration for businesses that can grow to thousands of people and billions of dollars, because the skills and actually to scale businesses are really rare, really different. And they're not something that I've got any skill in and not any particular interest in. I'm going large scale. We described it as cowboys and settlers.
Right.
The cowboys are people like me who sort of ride off into the sunset at 1,000,000 miles an hour and just go and do stuff. But actually building large scale businesses requires settlers and builders who come in with processes and procedures.
At what point did you kind of come to that kind of realization that, hey, I'm not the guy who's going to take this from 60 to 120 people. I need to get help.
Yeah, pretty early on, actually. I think one of my fellow directors early on asked, how are we doing against budget? And I just said, what budget? We basically just took our profit and poured it back into marketing and just go, And I was lucky. I hired some really good people around me. Had a fantastic CFO, and she basically kept us in business and helped us grow in the way that we needed to grow. And then gradually over time, just hired more experienced traditional business managers, including a CEO. So I wasn't the CEO. It's not my thing. I'm the innovator, if you like. So actually understanding what you're good at and why, and what skills you don't have, which is actually most of them. And then you surround yourself by great people with great people.
So one of the kind of tragedies that I see, Simon, is so many founders actually don't have that self-realization, and it takes kind of getting to Series B and big investors coming on board, and them having to pull that person aside to say you're not the one to take this forward. Mm-hmm. And it kind of often comes as a shock, a big bruise to the ego as well. How did you feel kind of when you realized that? And what tips have you got for anybody out there who's, kind of as a founder and is starting to now get those scaling and growing pains?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The Warren Buffett just said, that there are a lot of really, really bright people on the planet. And perhaps a founder's best job is to surround yourself with the best and brightest people you can attract into your business. So actually attracting talent into your business is your key job. It's not actually running the business. Yeah. It's set direction and attract talent. And other people can do most things better than you can. They're designers, finance people, programmers, just going, but your job's to bind that into a whole. And so I never really had a problem letting go of things because I thought most people were better than I was.
And in terms of, I guess, the funding side, we kind of joked earlier, you kind of use credit cards. Was then the business self-sufficient, or did you reach a point where you were getting into the, hundreds of staff members that you then had to go and, kind of seek external investment?
No, we became sort of positive, what do you call it, cash flow positive, and pretty early on. And we just stayed that way. We were always a profitable business and just grew the business in a very traditional manner. We didn't have any external investment. And, it's a very old-fashioned way of growing things. it doesn't suit every business. There are some businesses by their very nature that need absolutely tons of cash. And there are other businesses that need to scale really fast in order to, I think you could easily see why a Google or an Amazon or an Atlassian requires, capital, external capital. But, most businesses aren't multi-billion-dollar businesses. Most businesses could benefit from being more traditional type businesses.
You talked about talent just before. It's obviously my area of expertise. And one thing that really kind of fascinates me, and it could be the same in other industries, but I'm looking exclusively at fintech. I've interviewed well over 300 founders. Turns out, I think less than 1% have got a background in HR talent. And people, what tends to happen is they really underestimate how difficult it is to attract and retain and motivate top talent, and particularly when you haven't got much money. What were the things that you did to be able to get the people that could help you build this thing?
Yeah, again, luck plays into it. I mean, I suppose in hindsight, culture is probably the most valuable thing, which is more common today than it was 20 years ago. As a key plank of the business. That we actually built a micro donation startup after the tsunami of 2004, and every single interview that I actually attended, and I attended most of them in the office for quite a long time, they always mentioned that they were attracted to our business because of the values that were represented by this micro donations program. It almost became our HR platform in attracting people because of what it said about who we were as a business and what we were trying to do.
Wow. That's pretty innovative then.
It was incredibly innovative at the time, although today it's fascinating just seeing people actually place so much value on culture, which is important. And I would agree, actually hiring people is, well, it's like any other part of the business. It's there are experts who do it, and there are people who are better networked, better resourced. They can save you lots of time. The list goes on. Talent is I don't know how, you're the expert, but actually finding the right talent for the right type of company. Hugely challenging.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things that we've recognized as well, Simon, is we see this a lot. It's not necessarily that the wrong person was hired. They found the right person, but it's the wrong time of the business. As you mentioned, kind of 60 people versus 20 people is very different. 120 people is very different. 300 people is very different. And I think we've kind of, what we've seen is that so many businesses still take this traditional approach to hiring and looking at the workforce. And it's almost like they're looking at a 5-year return on investment, when actually if somebody can get you to the next stage within the next 12 months and they leave the business, that's actually a fantastic outcome, right?
Not many people, I would imagine, can transition across all those stages of business.
No. Look, and as you pointed out, right, there's very few, and kind of those are the ones that go on to be thousands of employees and the unicorn businesses, because they've got unique people, at the helm. And it's, there's, whether it's, we've joked about this the other day, I think, about Elon Musk, right? And but I think there's a reality there, right? There's a relentlessness of their vision that, for some people, it's not going to be right for everybody. In fact, there's going to be, a small amount of people that are going to be able to take that and deal with that and see value in that. Whereas others are just going to think, my boss is a dick, I can't handle him.
Yeah, I've read, Steve Jobs' biography, and, I know some of the famous anecdotes as a product designer myself, and he would have driven me to despair. I would have just resigned and said, what a dick. Couldn't have worked with the guy. But you look objectively and going, he's an absolute genius. So, is that what it takes to be a genius? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
So what was the point that you kind of took this from, a credit card and a kind of idea and a bit of dissatisfaction and solving a problem, to then a really successful business that was self-sufficient, no investors kind of breathing down your neck? What was the point that you thought, hey, it's kind of maybe it's time to go on and do something else?
Yeah, that took a while, I suppose. The ride was pretty good for at least a decade. So, through the GFC, I did wonder if we'd have a business on the other side. But probably right up until about 2012, maybe 2013. We're a couple of hundred people strong, $100 million plus in sales. Just, things were good. We've been self-sustaining all the way. Business was stable, but my interest and passion is innovation, design and innovation in particular. And as businesses scale, innovation slows. And we experimented with all sorts of angles to this experimentation, but actually there's so much work actually operating a business that actually getting new ideas up and out was challenging, to say the least.
I mean, insurance is such a highly regulated environment as well. It must have been frustrating for somebody who's a bit of as you mentioned, the cowboy and the innovator, and just go off at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, we used to do, so the micro donations program that we invented, for example, in the early days when the business was microscopic. The tsunami hit on a Tuesday. We'd had the idea by Tuesday evening about micro donations. We built the thing on a Wednesday and we launched it on a Thursday. I mean, we didn't even have a name for it until like 30 minutes before we launched it, and so put that in the code and off we went. You just couldn't move that fast as you got bigger, and a lot of the fun just disappeared. Perhaps, necessarily so. I mean, when you're a business of the scale that we were, the stuff that you deal with, I mean, it's not just about selling policies. There's claims, there's medical incidents, there's medical evacuations and tragedies all around the world that you've got to deal with, and it's just like it's the serious side of traveling. Really serious. And you got to see, we had an emergency medical team, around the clock. And you could literally walk around the corner from my office and you could just see all the cases, everything. And it gave you a real insight into actually what happens, which most people don't see. And that was really eye-opening. Really eye-opening.
Yeah. So how did the exit come about, and kind of what was life like after that?
So the exit, we made a decision at a certain point. I can't exactly remember when, but we were going to wrap the business up and sell it. And we went through a process, and we were really well advised by our independent board members about how to go about that. One of the best things was them to basically tell us founders to just stay the hell out of the process. Just let us get on with our job. And we went, okay. And that worked really, really well because there was no emotion involved. It was really, really, it was business. And they did that fantastically. And, businesses get bought, not sold. So we put it out, if you like, it through a process, to a tender, and people pitched and bid. And eventually the negotiations were stopped being about money and they were about terms. So when I exited the business, there weren't any conditions. I literally could have walked out the next day. We sold it in mid-2015 and I stayed on for about 6 months, 8 months, just to make sure the business was nice and stable. But, the challenge is that when this is something that nobody will ever tell you, I think, when you're a founder and you sell a business, is that the chances of a deal falling over are pretty high, really high. So you don't make any plans because the chances are the deal's going to fall over, which means you've got to keep running your business. Yeah. So that's your number one goal, is to keep running your business, because if you take your eye off the ball, you won't have a business. In some ways, actually closing the deal was a bit unexpected. I hadn't given any thought to what happens next because I just hadn't given any thought. So the practical details of that are just picking yourself up and trying to find a new direction and sort out the mess of your life in all of its complexity that you haven't given any thought.
Right. So was it a bit like the kind of Neil Armstrong kind of phenomenon where you've been to the moon and you come back and you're a bit kind of low and down because you think, how do I top that?
Yeah, something a bit like that. No, I'd assumed that I wish I'd been to the moon, by the way.
Moon nomads.
But I suppose initially I thought, well, I'll find it. I was 52, I think, by that stage, and I thought I'd do another startup. I thought I'd find another business, and I was looking around for some of those. But gradually it dawned on me that wasn't going to happen, because when you do a startup like Nomads, it was 20 hours a day. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely all-consuming. And you just don't have, well, I didn't at least have that much energy to go and do exactly that same thing again, knowing what it would take. And for me, the personal motivator was, I had a family that was growing up, 2 teenage boys, and I wanted that time because that window of opportunity from sort of early teenage to late teenage is short and you'll be gone really fast. So from that point of view, we spent a couple of years traveling around the world and doing lots of adventurous things as a family, which is fantastic. Which again, in hindsight, now we can't. Was fortunate timing.
And so you've kind of found some new passions now, and I think what are and this isn't to be dismissive, but I think are probably more pressing issues than things like buy now, pay later, and being able to pay in full. And you're doing a lot of work in something that I kind of really inspired me when I was in Singapore for the Fintech Festival in 2019, which is how this kind of whole ecosystem is everything so interconnected. You and I have talked about things like climate change, but there's a lot of stuff that you're looking at right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, so climate has been worrying me, since I don't know mid 2000s, I suppose, like 27, 28. It really got my attention. So when I saw the business, it was like I'm going to start doing something in solar. And I looked around, and gradually, over a year or two, I figured out that it actually wasn't just about solar. It was that there's this huge energy transition that's underway that will either be driven by cost, meaning it'll be the best and it'll be the cheapest, but it's also pushed along by the necessity of climate and climate change. And all of a sudden, you've got all of these companies, wind, solar, batteries, storage. Is there perhaps the transmission, sun cable, for example? But on the converse of that, you've got everything to do with agriculture and lab-grown meats, because beef is a huge supplier of CO2 into the atmosphere, and all these businesses and startups are all related around carbon emissions. And that's what I've spent the last 5 years investigating, reading, learning about, and investing in.
Fantastic. And so when you kind of, you're originally from the UK like myself, but you've been in Australia, nearly 30 years now. What's your take on Australia as a tech nation?
Yeah, it's fascinating because Australia, once upon a time, it was looking at the big island continent a long way from anywhere. And of course, the internet has a huge ability to change that. Even when I first came to Australia, I was always impressed by a lot of the innovation that, when you think about, Wi-Fi, it was invented by the CSIRO. There's all sorts of agricultural things that have been invented here through necessity because it's a big land with not very many people. And I've seen in the internet, Australians reach out to the world and achieve some incredible things. Atlassian springs to mind, not least. Fascinating journey. But some of the businesses that I'm looking at the moment, Mike Cannon-Brookes and his Sun Cable project, they're going to ship electrons to Singapore through a big extension cable, as he puts it. One of the companies related to that is 5B. 5B is a solar company, but they don't make solar. They had the insight that solar panels they'll be made in China and Korea and places. But actually, again, coming back to Australia, where a land with not so many people, you can't roll out square kilometres of solar with men and posts and drilling holes in the ground. It just doesn't make any sense. So they're driving the cost of deployment down through automation and robotics and prefabrication. And if they manage to pull it off, it will be an extraordinary win, driven by the lack of people. We're not a China where we can chuck, you can flick a switch and take 25,000 people and get them to start doing stuff. It's just not that fast.
Fantastic. And when it comes to things like fintech, if you were ever going to start a fintech again, what do you think would be an interesting area for you in that space?
Yeah, certainly. I'm not a big proponent of bitcoins. Probably a skeptic, probably closer to a skeptic than just a non-believer. But blockchain is still interesting for me. Some of the use cases there, particularly around contracts, or supply chains.
Yeah.
You can imagine a solution where you take a product, for example, and actually you have visibility of its supply chain back to the factory. Yeah. And that's pretty interesting. But, again, social and globalization, just being able to see the chain from, say, take a T-shirt and you can see the supply chain all the way back to the factory in Bangladesh through all the middlemen with all the costs. That would be fantastic to have visibility on, or food supply if you want to trust to do with food supply. And there are companies working on this stuff. But I think in all the fintech areas, that would be the most interesting.
What's your view of travel insurance now you're out of the industry?
Yeah, that's interesting. I met some people earlier this year, and I was talking about COVID, and I've had some views from the early days of this as a pandemic, and they were telling me about a discussion that they'd had at a senior level in their business, and they were asked a best case scenario and worst case snenario, and their worst case scenario would be back to normal by August of this year. Right. I was going, no, that's not going to happen. And I think it's taken a long while for people to figure out that they won't be back to normal; they'll be back to new normal, whatever that is, and we've got to work out what that looks like. But it won't be the last pandemic either, so yeah, we shall see. Travel insurance I still find frustrating. 30 years ago, you could fit a travel insurance document on one page of A4, and today it's like 120 pages of lawyer speak that nobody reads until they need it, and even then it doesn't make much sense. I think there is huge innovation that could be had in travel insurance, but I'm going to have to leave that up to somebody else.
Well, Simon, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to find you?
Probably through LinkedIn. Just do a search for my name and onto LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find me. And I'll be delighted to have conversations with anybody, particularly in the climate tech space.
And you can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. For early access to new shows and updates on the latest exclusive opportunities through Tier 1 People, subscribe to our newsletter by visiting the Fintech Chatter page on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, remember to press follow on your favorite podcast player, and please consider leaving us a review. It really does help me in bringing in great guests and help fintech fans like you discover the show. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can find out more at tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe